Hey guys. Well, let's begin. Tonight we slip quietly into the past. Not the golden castles or noble banquets kind of past, but the kind where your mattress is stuffed with straw, your neighbors can hear you breathe through the wall, and you haven't bathed since St. Brigid's Day. The kind where sex is never private, usually not romantic, and almost always complicated by fleas. You wake up wrapped in scratchy wool, surrounded by the sweet perfume of livestock and chamber pot fumes. The rooster's crowing, someone's baby is already crying, and your day is about to get deeply unsexy. To be honest, you probably won't survive this. So, before the lights go out, click like and subscribe, but only if you're brave enough to return tomorrow night. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know who else is lying awake with the candles low. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan, because silence makes this story worse, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink against the first crack of morning light bleeding through your shutterless window. It's cold. Medieval cold. The kind that numbs your toes through 3 layers of socks and whatever dignity you have left. You can't remember the last time you felt properly clean, and that's normal. Bathing is rare, soap expensive. Most folks rinse off maybe once a season. Some don't even bother. After all, the church teaches that too much bathing encourages lust. So naturally your body is cloaked in a musk cocktail of sweat, soot, and something distinctly goat adjacent. And speaking of privacy, don't bother looking for it. Your home is a single room shared by your entire family. Maybe a pig, maybe your grandma. Walls, thin or non-existent. Doors, swinging cloth or a creaky slab of. You stretch out on your bed, if you can call it that, a straw-stuffed sack atop rough wooden planks. It smells faintly of mildew and strongly of flatulence. Your partner snores beside you, still out cold. You both wear night clothes, just enough fabric to make undressing feel like a hassle later. But let's be honest, spontaneity isn't really on the medieval menu. You shift, straw rustling. Your limbs ache from yesterday's work, hauling hay, scrubbing pots, or mending whatever broke. You're hungry, because you're always hungry. Food is plain, porridge, onions, maybe salted fish if you're feeling royal. Lust is something that simmers beneath the fatigue, unspoken but not absent. The body has its needs, even if the soul's been shamed for centuries. When it comes to sex, forget candles and consent talks. You're living in a world where procreation is the only approved reason to do it, and pleasure is a sin best left unspoken, or at least unmoaned. That said, everyone still does it. People have always done it. The trick is navigating a society where moral rules are strict, but actual enforcement is chaotic and selective. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed sex was shameful, or whether that was just the church's official PR campaign. Some think ordinary folk weren't as repressed as monks made them out to be. After all, court records from the time are full of people being caught in barns, behind hedges, and yes, during festivals after far too much mead. But back to your morning. You step outside to relieve yourself in the communal ditch. The wind hits you like a slap. There's no toilet paper, just moss, or if you're rich, maybe linen scraps. You eye the neighbors, who are also squatting with blank stares, doing their best not to make eye contact. Welcome to romance, peasant edition. Even in this grimy routine, there's intimacy. Just not the kind we imagine today. Touch matters. Whispers count. A stolen glance in the market could mean more than a formal betrothal. People find their way to each other, even in the dirt. Especially in the dirt. Bodies are never really clean, but they're real, and warmth is warmth when nights drop below freezing. You make your way back inside, and already your chores are piling up. But you steal a moment. A hand slides under the blanket. Maybe you and your partner exchange a smirk. Maybe it's quick and silent, knowing the kids are pretending to sleep 5 feet away. Maybe you say nothing because, what's there to say? You're both just trying to stay alive and feel something along the way. That's the part no history textbook tells you. Desire doesn't wait for a clean bed or candlelight. It shows up anyway, with cracked lips and cold fingers, in the middle of your worst days. Still, there's danger, always. Getting pregnant means risking your life. Contraception? A whispered mystery passed down from older women who swear by boiled pennyroyal or amulets tied around the thigh. More on that later. For now, just know that every time you lie with someone, it could be a turning point or a death sentence. And yet you still do. So you rise again, wrap your shawl tighter, and head to the market. Maybe you'll see that baker's apprentices again, the one with forearms like oxen and a smile that lingers. You'd never admit it, but something in you stirs. You trade 2 eggs for a heel of bread and pretend not to blush when his hand grazes yours. Because even in the stench and the cold, with all the rules and rot, you're still human. You still crave connection, and under enough layers of wool, you can almost imagine a world where love doesn't come with fleas. You trudge through the muddy lane, clutching that heel of bread like it's treasure. A dog barks, children scream, and somewhere a rooster is losing its mind. This is courtship, medieval style, chaotic, loud, and entirely dependent on your standing in the village pecking order. There's no dating scene, no candlelit dinners, no just seeing where things go. If you're a commoner, you marry who your parents pick. Love is a luxury few can afford. You might like the baker's apprentice, but does he own land? Does his family have any animals? Is his father on good terms with the reeve? These questions matter more than butterflies, because in this world, your ability to marry is tightly wrapped in economics, social status, and most importantly, permission. You might think the church is your biggest obstacle to getting laid, but surprise, it's your local lord. Under manorial law, your marriage had to be sanctioned by your feudal overlord. Why? Because marrying outside your estate could mess with inheritance rights and property boundaries. And nothing ruins a good medieval love story, like an argument over whose ox gets the backfield. And even when you do get approval, there's still the issue of tithes. Getting married often means paying up. A marriage fine, a fee for living together on the manor, and possibly even a fertility tax, depending on where you live. You'd better hope your pig doesn't get sick, because without it, there goes your bridal gift. Historians still argue whether these rules were strictly enforced or more about maintaining control. Some records suggest people regularly married in secret, eloped to nearby towns, or simply lived as unofficial couples until someone in power noticed. In other words, even in the 1300s, loopholes existed, and people jumped through them with impressive nerve. If you're a woman, your marriage prospects are even more restricted. You're expected to be chaste, obedient, and preferably silent, unless spinning wool or making ale. Your family might send you to work as a servant in another household, hoping you'll catch the eye of someone useful. And if you get pregnant before the deal is sealed, well, now you're a scandal, a sermon, and possibly the subject of a town-wide confession marathon. One quirky tradition still practiced in pockets of medieval Europe: hand fasting. It's a sort of proto-engagement ritual where a couple holds hands and pledges themselves to each other, sometimes for a year and a day. Sounds romantic, except that it often served as an unofficial trial period. In some areas, if a pregnancy resulted, the pair were assumed married. Congratulations, you just got locked in, because someone miscounted moon cycle. By now, you're probably wondering, is anyone genuinely marrying for love? Occasionally, yes, but even then, love was expected to fit within very strict rules. Courtly love, the stuff of poems and troubadours, was designed for noble circles and usually happened outside of marriage, not inside it. Married couples were supposed to tolerate each other, raise kids, and hope for manageable in-laws. Affection was bonus material. You walk past a blacksmith hammering away. Sparks fly, but not the romantic kind. His daughter, maybe 14, is hanging laundry with her hair braided tightly and her eyes low. She's probably engaged already. Girls often married by their early teens, while men typically waited until they had land or a trade, usually mid-20s. The age gap wasn't always creepy, but it definitely could be. In some towns, marriage markets were held, where eligible women, especially widows, could be publicly courted or matched. And we mean publicly. Sometimes the entire community attended. There were dances, tokens of favor, and awkward stares from people who knew your business better than you did. And if you think you can flirt your way into someone's heart with poetry and charm, think again. Literacy is rare. Most folks can't read, let alone write a love letter. You'd have better luck carving a heart into a tree and hoping she sees it before a goat eats the bark. You pass by a small chapel, and a priest eyes you with thin suspicion. The church has a lot to say about marriage, but even more to say about sex without it. Still, priests weren't exactly paragons of purity. Many kept unofficial concubines or fathered children behind cloistered walls. Everyone knows it. No one talks about it. Back at home, your father is carving a wooden comb, muttering about the neighbor's daughter being marriageable now. Your mother nods silently. You feel a knot in your stomach. You're 16. That means it could be your turn next. But you haven't even kissed anyone, not unless you count that one weird game during the harvest festival. It's scary to think how little control you really have. You don't pick your spouse. You don't decide when to marry. You don't even know what married life will really look like, except for what you've heard through thin walls and drunk uncles. Still, despite all that, you find yourself daydreaming. Maybe he'll be kind. Maybe he'll let you keep your spinning wheel. Maybe he won't mind that you laugh too loud or like to hum while tending geese. Maybe he'll look at you, not like a contract, but like a person. Just maybe. But you don't say that out loud. You chew your bread slowly, dusted with ash from the hearth, and watch the sun begin to fall behind the trees. The bells ring in the distance. Another day gone. Another step closer to the life that's already being written for you. The bells echo through the village as dusk settles over the fields, and your father is already talking about dowries. You try to disappear into the shadows near the hearth, but it's no use. Everyone in the house hears it. We'll need to speak with the miller. His eldest is of age. That eldest? That's you. You nod, pretending this is fine, expected, normal. But inside, your stomach curls like a boiled eel. Medieval marriages are rarely romantic, and they're never about your feelings. They're strategic alliances between families, sometimes even entire estates. Property, livestock, social mobility, land rights, all of it hinges on who marries whom. And for most of Europe, girls are married off between ages 12 and 16. Boys, a bit older, but not always by much. Tonight your parents are negotiating your life over lentils. Tomorrow you might be promised to someone you've never spoken to, a man twice your age. Maybe he smells like turnips. Maybe he already has a son your age. None of that matters. What matters is that his farm borders your father's. His oxen are healthy, his debts are low, and he's offered 3 goats, which your father thinks is generous. The wedding, if it happens, won't be extravagant. There might be a feast, if harvest was good. There'll be ale, maybe a borrowed dress. You'll walk to the church, not because it's symbolic, but because there's no cart. The priest will perform the ceremony quickly, efficiently, and you'll be bound. Legally, socially, sexually. And then comes the part no one ever really prepares you for. The betting. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. After the ceremony, the entire community walks you to bed. Sometimes they carry you, sometimes they shout crude encouragements. Sometimes a priest blesses the sheets. Sometimes your uncle makes a joke you don't understand. But one way or another, the crowd escorts you to the marriage bed like livestock to pasture. And they don't all leave when you get there. In many regions, it's custom for a small group of close family members, parents, clergy, or even village elders, to watch the consummation. Not always directly. Sometimes they just wait outside to listen. Sometimes they linger long enough to make sure it starts. Some even touch the sheets the next morning, inspecting for blood. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or only common among nobility and upper-class families. Some think it was symbolic, a formal handoff from the father to the husband, with sex as a legal seal. Others believe it was more about ensuring the marriage was real and couldn't later be annulled. Either way, it happened, and you're now lying there, heart pounding, skin clammy, and someone just whispered, "Pierre Pichard." Your new husband? He might be kind, he might be rough, he might be drunk. He might be terrified too. He probably doesn't know much more than you do. No one teaches you. There's no manual. Just whispers, bad guesses, and maybe some advice from a friend who's heard things from a baker's cousin. And no, there's no such thing as privacy. The walls are thin, the floorboards creak, and tomorrow morning everyone will know what happened, or what didn't. You lie awake that night, staring at the wooden ceiling, tracing the grooves with your eyes. Your body is sore, not just from the physical act, but from the weight of it all. The expectations, the noise, the sheer awkwardness of being watched, judged, celebrated, and stripped of your autonomy in the same hour. Still, there are rituals that try to soften the edge. A bride cake crumbled over your head for fertility, a token under the pillow to ensure love. And if you're lucky, someone wise will slip you a root or a potion to prevent conception. For now. Because you're expected to get pregnant fast. Produce an heir. If a year passes without signs of swelling, the whispers begin. Maybe it's your fault. Maybe you're barren. Maybe God is punishing you. The pressure is constant, relentless. Your worth becomes measured in missed moon cycles and cradle fillers. Some regions even involve the entire village in fertility rituals. Offerings to saints, processions with symbolic dolls, even public blessings of your loins. You can't make this up. Okay, maybe some of it's exaggerated now, but back then, entire communities hinged on the success of one bedroom. It's not all Bluke. Sometimes love grows after marriage. Sometimes couples laugh together, sneak kisses behind stalls, even share dreams about moving to a slightly less miserable village. But the road there is narrow, steep, and filled with uninvited spectators. You rise early the next morning, unsure of your new role. Wife, property, partner. You're not sure yet. You know only this. Last night, you became something different in the eyes of the world. There's no going back, and there's no space to mourn what you lost. Childhood, choice, mystery. It's gone now. Outside, the village is already buzzing. Someone's ox got loose, a cart broke a wheel. Children shriek and chase each other barefoot through mud. You breathe in, shake the straw from your shift and begin the day. But in the back of your mind, one thing lingers. The way everyone smiled at you last night like this was the happiest moment of your life. Like they hadn't just handed you over, lit candles and said, "Go on now, make it count." You peel yourself out of the bed that still smells like yesterday's ale and ceremony. The linens are damp, your back aches from the straw mattress, and your new husband is already up tying his boots in silence. He doesn't say much. He hasn't said much at all. Maybe he's shy. Maybe he thinks words are wasted on someone who can't sign her own name. Either way, this is your life now. The fire has burned down to a few glowing coals and your feet find the cold floor like they've done it forever. You wrap yourself in a wool shawl, still stiff with smoke from last week's cooking, and step outside to fetch water. The sun hasn't even cleared the trees, and already your neighbor is sweeping her doorstep like she's got something to prove. She glances at you, that tight smile, that slow blink. You know what she's thinking. Did it happen? Was it good? Is she with child already? You draw water from the communal well with a rough rope that leaves splinters in your palm, and you try not to think about last night. Or rather, you try not to think about how everyone else is thinking about last night. Because whether they watched or not, the assumption is the same. You're married now, which means you're officially available for public commentary and unsolicited advice. And just when you think it can't get more uncomfortable, the local priest stops you on your way back. "Blessings upon your union," he says with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Then he hands you a small packet of herbs wrapped in cloth. "To keep the devil out of your bed," he says. You mumble thanks and walk away fast. Inside the cloth, probably lavender, wormwood, maybe rose petals. A local charm, the kind of thing passed down to keep nightmares or impure thoughts away. Ironically, you'll need more than herbs to protect your mind from what's coming next. Because here's a detail textbooks rarely emphasize. Medieval sexual ethics weren't just moral, they were public law. And while the church said sex should only happen within marriage and only for reproduction, everyone, from nobles to peasants, was still having it outside those lines. Which is why the church and community developed a rich, horrifying tradition of bedding ceremonies. Last night's ordeal? That was the warm-up act. In some regions, especially parts of Scandinavia and France, Guests didn't just escort the couple to bed, they actively participated. Some would hold the couple's clothes, others would toss nuts, symbolizing fertility, or sing ribald songs while the two of you awkwardly tried to get under the sheets. In more elaborate customs, a priest or elder would literally bless the bed, sprinkle it with holy water, or even place a cross at its head. And then there's the witnessing. Now, not every community did this, but enough records survive to confirm it. Some marriages required visual confirmation of consummation. Not metaphorical, literal. One or two designated witnesses would wait behind a curtain in a corner of the room, or if subtlety wasn't a concern, right there with arms crossed, staring at the sheets. Historians still argue whether this was standard practice, or only invoked when property and inheritance were on the line. After all, in noble families, a disputed marriage meant chaos. If you wanted to prove a union was true, the fastest legal shortcut was bedding witnesses. One fringe account even describes a noble bride required to be undressed by the women of both families, walk to the bed naked, and then tucked in while everyone clapped. And if that's not enough medieval cringe for you, consider this. Sometimes the couple wasn't even allowed to consummate in peace. The party just continued. Drinks were passed, musicians played. You were supposed to just get on with it, while everyone downstairs laughed and toasted your name. The phrase, performing under pressure, takes on a whole new meaning here. But maybe you get lucky. Maybe your husband is decent. Maybe he says nothing when the neighbors start asking nosy questions about how spirited you were. Maybe he doesn't pressure you to show the bloody sheet, an old tradition in parts of Europe where the stained wedding linens were displayed to prove virginity. Let's talk about that for a moment, because it's important. This obsession with virginity wasn't just cultural, it had real, terrifying consequences. A woman who couldn't produce proof might face humiliation, annulment, or even accusations of fraud. Virginity was currency, and if biology didn't cooperate, you paid the price. Which brings us to a quirky, almost tragic ritual found in some majority communities, the revisionizing potion. Made from wine, crushed herbs, and sometimes sheep's blood, it was applied before the wedding night to simulate the expected outcome. A desperate trick, yes, but one that saved reputations and marriages. Meanwhile, your new husband is at the tavern, casually discussing your performance with the blacksmith. No one finds this odd. You, however, can't even walk to the well without feeling like your pelvis is on trial. Later that night he returns, breath thick with mead, and wants to try again. Because once isn't always enough. Some customs said the act had to be repeated over multiple nights to truly seal the deal. And since contraception is risky, rare, and highly discouraged, every encounter comes with the looming shadow of pregnancy, which you're expected to welcome with grace. If you feel pain, offer it up to God. If you feel nothing, that's normal. Women weren't expected to enjoy it. If you do feel something, better not show it, or risk being seen as immodest. You lie still. You stare at the ceiling again. You wonder how long this will last. If this is love, if it ever becomes easier. And as the wind howls outside and the candle gutters low, one ridiculous thought slips into your tired mind. At least the goat didn't watch this time. The next morning you find yourself kneeling in the cold nave of the village church, hands folded, knees numb against uneven stone. You're supposed to be giving thanks for your new marriage, but your mind drifts. You can still feel your husband's breath on your neck from last night, the scratch of his stubble, the awkward rhythm, the absence of anything close to passion, or comfort, or choice. Now you're being told to confess. It's the custom, married or not, man or woman, peasant or lord. You file into the confessional booth like everyone else, and whisper your sins through a carved wooden screen. But here's the kicker. What counts as a sin in the medieval mind is basically everything involving your body. Desire is danger, lust is a demon in disguise, and sex, if it happens without the goal of making a baby, can land you squarely in spiritual hot water. The priest's voice is muffled but expecting. Have you committed impure acts with your husband outside the approved times? Translation: did you have sex while she wasn't fertile? Did you enjoy it? Was it on a holy day? In the wrong position? Yes, those details matter. The church didn't just disapprove of fornication. It tried to regulate the specifics of marital sex. Missionary? Acceptable. Anything else? Sinful. Positions were judged for their perceived alignment with natural law. And if you got too creative, straight to confession, possibly purgatory. Historians still argue whether most people actually followed these restrictions or just pretended to when confessing. Most likely they fudged the details. Who's going to tell Father Gregory that they got a little frisky on the Feast of St. Blaise? You admit to nothing. He gives you 3 Hail Marys anyway. When you step outside, the sunlight hurts. A group of girls walks past giggling behind their hands. You remember being one of them. Before you were a wife, before you were watched. Now they look at you like you're carrying some ancient, scandalous secret. Because in a way, you are. You know what sex feels like now, and that alone changes how the world sees you. It's easy to forget how much control the church had, not just over your soul, but over your bedroom. Preachers delivered sermons on modesty and chastity, railing against what they called carnal appetites. Lust was described in animal terms, a beast inside you, needing taming, and if you couldn't tame it, you prayed harder, fasted longer. Some even wore spiked undergarments to discourage nighttime arousal. Yes, that's real. Flagellation. Whipping oneself to ward off desire was a common monastic practice. Monks and nuns believed physical punishment purified the soul. The more you suffered, the more holy you became, and if you accidentally dreamt about sex, better start flogging. One odd, rarely mentioned tidbit: some monks recorded their erotic dreams in coded Latin, then burned the pages after confession. The shame ran that deep. But so did the fascination. Because, here's the twisted part, the people most obsessed with suppressing desire couldn't stop thinking about it. Entire manuscripts were filled with warnings against temptation, often describing the exact thing they were warning against in vivid, borderline poetic detail. There's one particularly strange entry from a 13th century monk describing a dream about a woman with hair like flax and eyes that burned like holy oil. He writes pages about resisting her, and then slips in a line about waking up drenched in sweat, begging forgiveness. It reads like a spiritual thirst trap. And those confessional booths, they became hotspots for intimate secrets. People confessed things they'd never say out loud, about their spouses, their neighbors, their bodies, even their dreams. The priest became a kind of medieval therapist, except his only prescription was prayer and maybe a ban on dancing for a month. Still, not all clergy was scandal-free, far from it. Many priests had concubines, unofficial wives who lived in the rectory but were never publicly acknowledged. Parishioners often looked the other way, so long as the priest kept baptisms on time and the wine stocked. You pass by one such woman in the market, older, quiet, always dressed plainly. Everyone knows she lives with Father Gregory. No one says it, but when she reaches for the same apple you do, her hand is gentle and she gives you a small nod. Like she knows, like she understands. That night, lying beside your husband again, you wonder how many of the rules actually matter, and how many are just performance. Everyone seems to be pretending that they're pure, pretending they don't dream, pretending that their bodies belong solely to their faith, not to their feelings. You look at him. He's already snoring, mouth open, soft snores whistling like a deflating wineskin. You suppress a laugh. Then, without planning it, you touch his arm. Just lightly, for no reason, not for duty, not for God, just because. And maybe that's the biggest rebellion of all, to seek comfort without guilt, to want warmth, not because someone said you should, but because you're cold, because you're tired, because you're still human under all these layers of wool and rules. Outside, the moon rises, a pale coin in the sky. The village is quiet, except for the distant sound of an owl and the occasional cough through the thin walls. You close your eyes, and wonder what you'll confess next week. Maybe the same thing. Maybe nothing. Or maybe, one day, you'll stop confessing and start remembering who you were before all this began. The next morning, before the first crow of the rooster even slices through the still dark air, you're up again. The house is cold, the fire's gone out, and your husband's already lacing his boots for work in the fields. You sit on the edge of the bed, feeling the dull ache in your hips, wondering if your womb has started its countdown. 'Cause now, all anyone wants to know is when you'll be with child. Every sideways glance from your mother-in-law is a reminder. Every bowl of bitter broth she pushes toward you, laced with herbs you're too afraid to question, makes it clear. You're expected to produce, and soon. Which brings you to your current situation, standing in a smoky kitchen while a midwife with breath like old cheese presses 2 fingers against your abdomen and squints thoughtfully. "Swelling yet," she mutters, as if she were checking a root cellar for spoiling onions. You want to disappear. The pressure to conceive in the medieval world is relentless. It's not just personal, it's public. Your fertility is tied to property rights, social standing, even divine favor. If you can't have children, you might be cursed. If you miscarry, someone will whisper about sin. Maybe you brought it on. Maybe it was that bad thought you had. Or the wrong phase of the moon. Virginity gets the spotlight, but fertility is the real obsession. Which is why medieval communities created all sorts of bizarre rituals, tests, and protections to keep your reproductive system in working order. Let's start with the urine test. Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. A wise woman or herbalist might examine your urine's color, clarity, even smell. One old text suggests mixing urine with wine. If it changes texture or scent, congratulations, you might be pregnant. Or cursed. Hard to tell. Another test? Tying a clove of garlic inside your underclothes overnight. If your breath smelled like garlic in the morning, it was believed your reproductive tract was open. Which, depending on your life stage, was either good news or very bad. Historians still argue whether these tests were taken seriously by the educated class, or if they were mostly folk traditions kept alive by oral culture. Either way, you're surrounded by women who swear by them. Some even wear amulets near the womb, carved with astrological signs or prayers to obscure saints. One fringe find in an old grave included a tiny lead charm inscribed with symbols designed to guard the gate. You're not sure what that means, but you start to wonder if you should be wearing one too. Because once conception does happen, things don't exactly get easier. Pregnancy is risky, terrifying, and very poorly understood. You'll be expected to continue working, hauling water, kneading dough, tending animals. Rest is a luxury. Medical knowledge? Limited. No one fully knows how the body works. Theories still center around humours, those magical liquids, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you're ill, it's because your humours are out of whack. And fertility? Same logic. If your womb is too cold, you won't conceive. If it's too hot, you might birth a child with a fiery temper. Doctors, the few that exist, argue endlessly about how much influence the moon, diet, or even the mother's mood can have on the baby. Your neighbour once claimed her son was born with a crooked arm because she looked at a deformed goat during her 3rd month. You want to laugh, but you don't. Because what if she's right? Your body is now community property, not in the legal sense, but in the social one. Everyone has a theory, everyone has advice, everyone watches what you eat, what you say, how quickly you walk. You can't even sneeze without someone crossing themselves. And if months pass with no pregnancy, it gets worse. They might drag you to the priest. They'll ask you if you've been holding back, if you've committed secret sins, if your thoughts have been impure, because clearly something is blocking God's favor. Which brings us to the dark edge of medieval fertility culture, trial by ritual. In some places, women suspected of infertility, or worse, of using magical means to prevent conception, were subjected to strange rites. One included standing barefoot on sacred ground, reciting prayers while holding a hot iron rod. If you dropped it, or cried out, clearly not virtuous enough to bear children. Another involved drinking a mix of herbs, vinegar and milk to purify the womb. It often caused vomiting, which, ironically, some took as a sign it was working. You hear stories of women sent into seclusion, banished from the household. One whispered tale tells of a wife whose own mother-in-law paid a hedge witch to unbind her womb. She died 2 weeks later. Fever, bleeding, but the family said it was God's will. Still, there are protectors in this world. Older women, midwives, herbalists. They know the dangerous routes. They whisper when no one's looking. Some of them can even prevent a pregnancy, though it's illegal and punishable by the church. One such remedy, a tea brewed from rue, tansy and pennyroyal. Taken early enough, it can stop what's just beginning, or stop your heart. Depends on the dose. You've seen a girl try it. She didn't walk right for weeks. But sometimes, when you lie in bed, you think about it. Just in case. Just to have a choice. Tonight, your husband touches your back. He smells of hay and onions. His hands are rough. He's gentler now than he was that first night, but the expectation still hangs heavy in the air. You nod, and he climbs under the blankets. Afterward, you lie still, counting the cracks in the ceiling again, wondering if tonight was the night, wondering if you want it to be. That way. The world doesn't give you time to decide. The brothel's tucked behind a tannery, because nothing hides sin better than the stench of rotting leather. You'd think the church would object to it being this close to the chapel, but surprisingly, they don't. In fact, in more than a few towns across medieval Europe, the church owns the building, rents it out, takes a cut. Turns out, suppressing sin is good business. Regulating it, even better. You pass by quickly, pretending not to notice the chipped red door or the woman leaning in the threshold, arms folded, eyes knowing. Her name's Agneta. She's older than most. You glance once, she gives you a wink. In medieval cities, especially busy trade towns like London, Paris or Avignon, brothels are often not just tolerated, but actively licensed. Why? Because in the minds of many civic leaders, a pressure valve, it keeps unmarried men from corrupting virgins or wives, keeps chaos at bay. At least, that's the theory. Historians still argue whether this was effective or just optimistic bookkeeping. Some say it kept things orderly. Others say it only disguised the worst abuses behind closed doors. Inside the brothel, things are rough, but not chaotic. Women bathe in reused water. They apply rose oil if they can afford it, or crushed rosemary if they can't. Some use ground walnut shells as exfoliant. Others dab on a mixture of vinegar and lead powder to lighten their skin, because pale means pampered, and pampered brings higher paying clients. It's a grim irony. These women who society scorns and mocks often understand anatomy, desire and survival better than most priests. You hear whispers that the brothel has its own rules. No rough handling, no payment, no touch. Some even say there's a madam who keeps the books better than the town clerk. She's said to take confession once a month, just enough to stay technically redeemable. That kind of moral flexibility runs deep in the Middle Ages. One chronicler noted a bishop who toured his town's brothel to make sure the girls were being kept in clean linen. Another funded a hospital with profits skimmed from taverns and brothels, calling it a necessary act of mercy. Meanwhile, Agneta's still watching you from the threshold. You wonder what she sees. A nervous wife, a curious girl, a potential employee. Not that you'd consider it, not seriously, but some women have no other choice. Widows with no family, girls disowned after bearing a child out of wedlock, women who needed bread and couldn't spin wool fast enough. Sometimes, this is the only open door, even if it leads nowhere good. One curious fact, some brothels hang signs or paint images to advertise. A red cross, a woman in a green dress. In a few places, customers drop tokens at the door, little clay coins, to buy time inside. The most expensive rooms are upstairs, the cheapest behind a curtain. And the church, they issue rules. No brothels during Lent. No working on Sundays. No underage girls. Though those lines are blurred constantly. Enforcement is a joke, but the rules make it look righteous. That's what matters. You walk past the alley, but part of your mind lingers. Agnetta's laugh echoes faintly behind you. Not far from the brothel is a bathhouse, and yes, the two are often linked. While the public bathhouse was meant for hygiene, it wasn't just about scrubbing behind the ears. In some cities, bathhouses became covert sex clubs, places where men and women could rent towels, soap, and company. The church cracked down hard, but not always successfully. In Paris, laws were written to separate bathhouses from brothels. In practice, they just built a new door between them. And speaking of hygiene, you're probably wondering what protection people had back then. The answer? Very little. Some brothels offered rudimentary protection. Linen sheaths soaked in wine or vinegar, believed to kill bad airs that carried disease. These weren't condoms in the modern sense. They were more like sacks, tied at one end, reused often, and only slightly less risky than nothing. Which brings us to disease, and not just the sniffles. Before syphilis swept through Europe in the 1490s, there were already plenty of venereal diseases lurking in medieval life: gonorrhea, chlamydia, possibly forms of herpes. But with no microscopes or understanding of bacteria, doctors diagnosed everything as burning, itching, or curse of Venus. Treatments, charms, bloodletting, hot pokers, seriously, and mercury. Lots and lots of mercury. You hear tales of knights who returned from crusades with desert boils and passed them along like war trophies. Monks blamed prostitutes. Prostitutes blamed the devil blamed bathing. Everyone nodded and went back to suffering. Still, some brothels had doctors on call, or at least barb surgeons, who bled patients, popped abscesses, and wrote receipts in Latin they barely understood. Somewhere, inside that red-doored building, a girl is humming. Maybe she's bored. Maybe she's broken. Maybe she still hopes for something better. And maybe, when the church bells toll in the distance and the men stagger home, she'll light a candle for herself, just in case someone's still listening. You don't look back. But you think about her that night, lying in your too narrow bed, staring at your husband's back. You think about the choices some women have, the ones they don't, and the line between sin and survival that no one seems able to draw. A red blister has formed near the corner of your thigh. At first you think it's from the heat or maybe a scratch from thatched straw. But now it's sore, warm, and there's more of them. Your heart stutters. You've heard stories about this. You don't say anything to your husband. He wouldn't know what to do anyway, except maybe panic or blame you. Instead, you quietly visit the herbalist at the edge of the village, the one with the crooked teeth and the slightly off-smelling cottage. She glances at the mark once, then mutters a prayer under her breath. "The burning pox," she says. "You need elderflower, yarrow, and, if you can get it, a touch of holy water." You don't ask where she gets the holy water. You just pay in eggs and leave. In medieval Europe, sexually transmitted diseases are misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and often spiritualized. Illness of the flesh is often seen as punishment for sins of the flesh. And while modern historians still debate how widespread STDs truly were before the 15th century, there's little doubt that medieval people feared them deeply, even if they didn't fully grasp what they were. The French disease, later known as syphilis, doesn't explode into recorded history until the late 1490s, following the return of French and Spanish troops from Naples. But long before that, physicians described symptoms we now associate with gonorrhea, chancroid, herpes, and other conditions. They didn't call them STDs, they just called them shameful afflictions. One London record from 1379 describes a baker's apprentice whose privy member rotted and gave off odour most foul. No real diagnosis, just horror. The assumption, he consorted with unclean women or was cursed by a rejected lover. Treatment is as medieval as you'd expect. Mercury ointments, leeches, fumigation. One Parisian brothel allegedly used sulfur smoke rooms to cleanse workers weekly. It probably caused more damage than disease prevention. And then there's the mercury enemas. Yes, enemas. Because physicians believed purging the body of impure humors could cure almost anything, including venereal symptoms. Mercury was rubbed on the skin, injected, or administered through the most unfortunate routes. Naturally, it didn't work. It just made people sicker. But at least they looked like they were trying, which meant the church might go easy on them. You return from the herbalists with a handful of strange-smelling herbs. You boil them in goat's milk, as instructed, and apply the warm compress. The sting is awful. Your husband asks what it's for. Saddle rash. You lie. He nods, distracted. He doesn't want to know more. The stigma is real. No one wants to admit they're infected, especially not married couples. Better to pretend. Better to pray. And that's exactly what many do. Shrines to healing saints become popular pilgrimage sites. St. Roche, who's said to have survived plague and healed sores, St. Mary Magdalene, often miscast as a reformed prostitute, becomes a kind of intercessor for those suffering temptation. One fringe case tells of a woman in York who carried a bone fragment said to cure womb heat. She wore it in a pouch tied around her waist and swore it eased her pain. Whether it did or not, the faith alone seemed to help her walk taller. The line between medicine and magic is impossibly thin. You think about visiting the shrine, but it's a 2-day journey, and your husband says the barley won't thresh itself. So you wait. You clean the sores with vinegar. You pray under your breath. You avoid your husband's gaze at night. Meanwhile, rumors swirl. The tavern girl hasn't been seen in days. The baker's wife says she died from vengeful boils. You suspect otherwise. Back in the fields, someone jokes crudely about itchy trousers, laughter, spitting, then silence. Everyone's afraid. No one says it. One strange remedy makes its way to your ears. A paste of crushed snails and sheep's lard, spread under the arms to draw the fire away from the loins. You consider it, briefly. Then don't. Historians still argue whether medieval medical texts reflect actual common practices or just elite academic theories. Many women relied instead on oral traditions passed down from mother to daughter, whispered behind shutters. Remedies involving mugwort, juniper, soot. Most of it untested, some of it dangerous, all of it desperate. One woman, you know, keeps a silver ring dipped in consecrated wine. She presses it to her abdomen whenever she feels pain, murmuring a rhyme that sounds more pagan than Christian. She hasn't died yet, so maybe it works. You lie awake one night, sweating through your shift, unsure if the rash is healing or spreading. Your husband rolls away, muttering. You wonder if he's the one who brought it home to you. You wonder if he even knows. You press your fingers to the angry red bump near your thigh and whisper Saint Roche's name 3 times, just in case. Because here, in the dirt and dark, medicine is mostly hope in disguise. The oxen groan and creak as the cart wobbles past, carrying firewood and 3 screaming children covered in more dirt than clothing. You lean on your broom, eyes burning from smoke and fatigue, and watch them tumble out like puppies. One of them, barefoot, snot-faced, laughs so hard he topples over into a haystack. His mother yells, wipes her hands on her apron, and carries on like this is normal. And it is. For the peasant class, sex and relationships don't have luxury, but they do have reality. No silk sheets, no troubadours, no elaborate rites. Just hard labor, cramped quarters, and stolen moments in the barn when no one's looking. Intimacy is less candlelight and more candle stub, flickering while you try not to knock over the butter churn. You start your morning the usual way, hauling water, grinding oats, and avoiding eye contact with your brother-in-law, who clearly thinks that one kiss you exchanged at Beltane still means something. It doesn't. But he hasn't let it go. You're married now, but that doesn't stop people from whispering, flirting, or grabbing when the ale flows too freely. Boundaries are porous in a world where everyone sleeps, eats, argues and dies, practically on top of each other. That hut down the road with 4 people crammed into one room, that's the norm. Whole families share beds, parents, children, even in-laws. And when the lights go out, there's no insulation, no private chamber, no creaky floorboard escape. If anything happens between 2 lovers, everyone hears it. Historians still argue whether this proximity dulled people's sense of sexual shame or made everyone hypersensitive to it. Some accounts suggest a casual attitude, what can you do? Others describe communities full of gossip and moral panic. It probably varied village to village. But one thing's consistent, sex wasn't hidden, it was overheard. And yet, life finds a way. You see it in small things. That stolen kiss behind the pigsty, the whispered laugh between 2 people cleaning fish, the way someone brushes a hand over someone else's wrist just a beat longer than needed. In a life built around survival, affection still happens. But festivals, especially those tied to fertility like Beltane or Midsummer, boundaries loosen. Couples pair off for greenwood weddings, temporary unions consummated in the forest under the stars. Sometimes they become real marriages, sometimes they just become babies. You remember one May Day when 2 shepherds vanished at dusk and didn't reappear until morning. They married a month later, no questions asked. The priest rolled his eyes. The whole village brought ale. There's an honesty to peasant relationships. No pretense, no courtly love rules to follow. If someone likes you, they say it, or try to show it through chores. Nothing says devotion like helping shovel muck in silence. But that doesn't mean women have it easy. Far from it. As a peasant wife, you're expected to bear children, manage the house, grow food, raise animals and assist in the fields. You wake up before sunrise and collapse after dark. And between all that, you're still supposed to provide wifely service whenever your husband feels entitled to it. One widow you know, Marta, said her late husband had a rule. If the cows needed milking, so did he. She said it with a crooked smile, but no one laughed. Even so, not every union is miserable. Some couples genuinely like each other, even love each other. You've seen it, the way Tomas and Lena trade vegetables and bad jokes, how he always saves the soft part of the bread for her, how she hides his favorite knife so no one borrows it. Love, here, is a quiet language built out of habit and money. One odd fringe belief passed down in your village. Couples shouldn't have sex during harvest season or the crops will wither. It's not official doctrine, but enough people believe it that the priest doesn't bother arguing anymore. He just mutters about priorities. So, during the busiest months, you all pretend. Pretend not to notice what happens in the hayloft. Pretend not to hear footsteps behind the barn. Pretend the rustling isn't mice. Everyone's in on it. No one admits it. You remember the first time you and your husband snuck away from chores. It wasn't romantic, just necessary. You both smelled like turnips. You were both tired. But you laughed after, shared a plum, and wiped the straw from each other's hair. That moment was more real than the entire wedding. Later, when you help Lena with laundry, she mentions that she hasn't bled in 2 months. She's nervous. Her youngest just started walking. Another mouth feels impossible. She leans in and says she's thinking about seeing the woman with the rabbit bones and fennel oil, the one who helped Marta last year. You know who she means. You've heard the rumors, herbal knowledge passed from hands too callous to hold books. You squeeze her hand, say nothing. In this world, love and survival are tangled vines. You take what joy you can, you keep your secrets close, and you learn that sometimes not getting caught is the closest thing to freedom. That night your husband reaches for you. You pretend to be asleep at first, but when his hand stays, soft and unsure, you turn toward him. His cheek. It tastes like sweat and barley. No one needs to hear this part. You're squatting in the dirt, scrubbing linen with a lye-soaked brush that smells like soap and regret, when someone asks the question, "Did you ever wear one?" You glance up. It's the blacksmith's niece, maybe 12, face full of freckles and far too much curiosity. She means a chastity belt. He snorts. What, an iron knicker trap? She nods solemnly. They said Lady Bruner's had spikes. You raise an eyebrow. Then Lady Bruner's bladder must be blessed. Because here's the thing about chastity belts. Despite what legends, paintings, and bad Renaissance fairs might tell you, they were mostly myth, metaphor, or misunderstanding. Yes, a few examples exist in museums. Some are elaborately forged contraptions of metal and leather, shaped vaguely like underwear with a locking mechanism. But historians still argue whether these were ever really worn, or just symbolic displays, courtroom tropes, or 18th century fakes misattributed to earlier times. The idea of locking up a woman's genitals with a key sounds medieval, but it probably wasn't medieval, more like Renaissance curiosity shop weirdness. That said, the concept of controlling women's sexuality? Very real. You feel it every day, in the way your husband expects access without question, in how older women warn you against dancing too freely at festivals, in the way a midwife might mutter, "Tight hips, thank God," as if your body was built more for guarding than giving. So no, you never wore a chastity belt. But you didn't have to. Your entire life was won. Freedom came with a price, especially for women. Wander too far, talk too loudly, laugh too much, or, God forbid, be seen alone with a man, and suddenly you're not virtuous anymore. You're suspect. Some girls from wealthier homes were literally locked indoors, kept in high towers or convents until marriage. Others were told to wear binding sashes or painful undergarments to remind them of their purity. And if something happened to them, if someone took advantage, or worse, they were still blamed because a good woman doesn't put herself in danger. One strange, rarely discussed ritual you once overheard: in some German towns, brides were examined by a matron of honor, a respected older woman who checked for signs of virginity before a wedding. No hymen? No problem, if the dowry was big enough. But if not? The whispers began. One local woman, Alwina, was cast out after her wedding night when her sheets stayed clean. Her husband accused her of deceiving him. She swore she'd never been with anyone, but blood is proof, and she had none. Truth is, biology isn't neat. Some women don't bleed, some lose that membrane years earlier, doing chores or riding a horse. No one cares. Proof or punishment. Those are your options. Still, the fantasy of the chastity belt lives on, especially among nobles. You hear stories of knights locking their wives before leaving on crusade. The idea of it is poetic, iron loyalty. But most of these stories come from later centuries, and the few real examples show signs of being display pieces, not wearable. One odd discovery: a supposed chastity belt found in Italy in the 1800s with rusted hinges, sharp edges, and no ventilation holes. Try wearing that for more than 20 minutes. You'd pass out. Or worse. Probably worse. It's likely that the few belts that did exist were ceremonial, used in morality plays, kept in curiosity cabinets, or designed to scare rather than secure. But that fear? Very effective. Because even without belts, your world is locked up, not with keys, but with reputation. You can't walk alone after sunset. You can't speak too boldly in church. And if you ever admit to desire, well, clearly the devil's whispering in your ear. Ironically, men are rarely questioned. If they stray, boys will be boys. If women stray, ruin. One time, you watched as a young wife was paraded through the square with her hair unbound and her shift inside out. Her crime? A flirtation that got out of hand. Her punishment? Public shame. Her husband left town. She stayed. Her family stopped answering the door. No iron belt needed, just silence. And yet, you remember the rumor. The midwife once claimed an old widow in a nearby village did wear one. Voluntarily. Said it was made of softened leather with bronze rivets. Said she used it not for modesty, but for safety. after a drunken neighbor grabbed her behind the stable. Hard. To rape what you can't reach, she'd allegedly said. You don't know if it's true, but the image stuck with you. Not because it's titillating, but because it's tired. A woman so used to danger, she'd rather wrap herself in armor than trust the world to leave her alone. That night, as you undress in the dark, you wonder what kind of strength that takes. You think of the girls growing up now, the freckled niece who asked the question. You want her to know the truth, not the fairy tale, not the museum rumor, the truth. That chastity belts weren't real, but the fear behind them was. Still is. And that no one should ever have to wear iron to feel safe. The manor bell rings before sunrise, echoing off the dew-soaked fields and stirring every living soul within earshot. You wipe sleep from your eyes with the back of your hand and stumble out of bed, still sore from yesterday's labor. But today, you're not headed to the grain fields. Today, you've been summoned. Not as a peasant, as a servant. You've heard the whispers about Lord Renault and his special needs. They say he prefers the younger ones, the quiet ones, the ones who won't talk back. You pull your shawl tighter and try not to think too hard about what that means. Among the nobility, sex isn't always about romance or even lust. Often it's just another form of power. Marriages are arranged for land, money, titles, or political alliance. The couple might meet on the wedding day. They might never speak afterward. Love, not required. You arrive at the manor kitchen and are handed a tray of sweetbread and warm cider. To the solar, the cook says, not meeting your eyes. You carry the tray upstairs, careful not to spill. The stone steps feel colder than usual. Lord Renault is waiting, alone. He's wearing a robe, nothing else. He smiles too long. You place the tray down without speaking, back straight, eyes low. If you're lucky, he'll let you leave. If you're unlucky, he'll decide to test your obedience. Because in this world, noblemen can do almost anything, especially to women of lower status. Technically, yes, the church forbids adultery, assault, and exploitation. But enforcement? Laughable. If you accuse a noble of wrongdoing, prepare to disappear or worse. There's an old term whispered by maids in dark corners. Droit du seigneur. The right of the lord. The supposed custom that allowed a feudal lord to sleep with a peasant bride on her wedding night. Historians still argue whether this ever really happened, or if it's just folklore, propaganda, or a badly misunderstood joke from centuries ago. Still, you've heard too many stories. Women with bruises and no memory. Girls sent away to visit cousins and never returning. Servants dismissed without pay. The air in the manor always smells faintly of fear. And yet, not all lords are wolves. You've seen other manors where the lady of the house keeps order, where the lord respects his staff, where love, genuine gentle love, blooms in the unlikeliest corners. It's rare, but not impossible. One noblewoman, Lady Adelia, was said to have chosen her own husband, her cousin's steward, 10 years her junior. People gasped. The priest scowled. But they say she never stopped smiling. Some called it scandal, others called it witchcraft. Most just called it foolish. But not you. You clean the solar and back away, tray empty, hands shaking slightly. Lord Renault didn't touch you today. Maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe worse. Power isn't just in fists or favors, it's in silence. And noblemen have all the silence they want. Which brings us to courtly love, that high-flown romantic ideal popular among the upper classes. Poems, songs, sighs, longing gazes exchanged between knights and ladies, often married ladies. Think Lancelot and Guinevere, Tristan and Isolde. Pure passion, always unattainable, always tragic. But let's be clear, courtly love was more performance than practice. It followed rules as strict as any chess game. The lady must be beautiful, noble, untouchable. The knight must be devoted, poetic, miserable, and no one was supposed to actually act on it. Just yearn. Elegantly, Historians debate whether these emotions were sincere or just a poetic flex for bored nobles. One fringe theory suggests courtly love was invented as a safe outlet for people trapped in loveless political marriages. Emotional adultery, staged for social clout. In one surviving manuscript, a knight describes trembling in the presence of her scented glove and weeping into his ale for 7 weeks. You wonder what that lady thought of all this. Did she enjoy it? Did she roll her eyes? Did she even know? But among the lower ranks, this kind of theatre isn't just rare, it's absurd. You don't have time to pine for someone's glove. You're too busy boiling laundry and avoiding your landlord's stare. That said, the noble class does shape how everyone else thinks about romance and sex. Songs travel. Stories leak down from castles. Even peasants can recite a few lines from the Romance of the Rose, that famously confusing allegory about desire and virtue and garden gates that definitely aren't about gardening. You once heard a drunk shepherd try to quote it to his crush. He got as far as "I yearn for thy flower" before she punched him square in the nose. Fair. Still, you think about it sometimes, what it would feel like to be courted slowly, sweetly, not taken, not traded, just chosen. But that's not how it works here, not most of the time. You leave the manor with your head down, dust sticking to your shoes, stomach queasy. The sun's risen high now. Another peasant woman walks past with a basket of turnips. You catch her eye. She nods. She nods. Later, in the fields, your husband asks how it went. You say, "Quiet morning." He nods, wipes his brow, and keeps digging. There's nothing else to say, not unless you want trouble. So you carry the weight like everyone else, hide it behind chores and bread and tired eyes. And you pray that tomorrow, when the bell rings again, it won't be your name they call. There's a boy in the village who sings to himself while gathering firewood, always off key, always too loud. People say he's odd, that he doesn't look at girls the way he should. You notice the way he stares, just a little too long at the tanner's apprentice. Broad-shouldered, sun-browned, blissfully unaware. The firewood boy smiles when the apprentice passes, then quickly looks away. No one talks about it, not directly, but you hear the tone when his name comes up, flat, cautious, clipped. In medieval Europe, same-sex attraction is not just taboo, it's criminal. The church classifies it as a sin against nature, bundling it with everything from gluttony to bestiality in long, omnibus lists of mortal offences. To even speak of it openly invites suspicion. To act on it, that can get you flogged, exiled, or in the worst cases, executed. And yet, despite all the danger, queer people still existed, still loved, still found ways to survive. They had to be careful, very careful. Most expressions of same-sex desire happened in code, through poetry, gestures, shared songs. A sideways glance, a pressed flower, a carved initial on the underside of a wooden bowl. You once found a scrap of parchment tucked behind a stone in the church wall. It held a clumsy rhyme. He walks like God carved him for my torment. But I thank God for the sight. No name, no signature, just longing in disguise. Historians still argue whether these hidden relationships were more tolerated in some communities than others. Some say monasteries and convents allowed discreet closeness, as long as no one got too obvious. Others say punishment was swift and brutal the moment someone dared to step out of line. There are records, though, troubling ones. A 14th century trial in Florence records 2 young men accused of unlawful love. Their punishment? Public whipping and exile. The record includes no details of their affection, just the cold facts of judgment. And yet, art from the same period tells a different story. In illuminated manuscripts, figures of the same gender are often shown embracing or sharing beds. Monks write flowery letters to one another, full of emotion and spiritual devotion that tiptoe right up to the edge of romantic. One fringe theory suggests that some of these saintly companionships we read about, 2 men or 2 women living and dying together, may have been more than just platonic. We may never know. The church rewrote many stories to remove ambiguity, but they couldn't erase all of it. You think of the weaver's daughter, who's never once flirted with a boy but always lights up when the baker's wife walks into the market. She stands a little straighter, fixes her hair. The baker's wife smiles back, small, quick. You once caught them whispering behind the dye house. Neither of them noticed you. You didn't tell anyone. Because even now, even here, queer love endures. Quiet, fierce, full of risk. There are rumors of secret rituals, ceremonies where two people of the same sex pledge themselves to one another in the woods, beneath the moon, with only trees and stars as witness. Some call it heresy, others call it survival. And still, there are protections. Some whisper prayers to obscure saints, Saint Sergius and Saint Bacchus, Roman soldiers and companions sometimes depicted arm in arm in ancient iconography. A few believe they guard lovers forced to hide. You once saw a boy carve their initials into a piece of bone and wear it around his neck under his shirt. You never asked what it meant. You just nodded. Laws are cruel, but hearts don't care. And for some, the risk is worth it. You remember the time a traveling singer passed through the village. He played a lyre with too many broken strings and wore boots that didn't match. But his voice? Smooth as honey over hot stones. That night at the tavern he sang a song that didn't name its subject, just called them you. You held my hand when others turned away. You smiled like you had never been afraid. He caught your eye when he sang the second verse, and he caught the boy, with the firewood's eye too. No one said a word. But that night you saw them both walk behind the stables just for a moment, just long enough. The next day the singer was gone. No one mentioned it. But the boy, he smiled to himself for a week. In this world, there's no room for rainbow flags, no public vows, no freedom. But in the cracks of the stone, between the church bells and the confessional booths, there are stories. There is longing. There is courage. And even here, buried beneath centuries of shame and law and silence, love finds a way to breathe. You wake up sore, not from last night, though your hips still feel the echo of his weight. It's from the baby. She's teething, and loud, and stronger than she looks. You've slept maybe 3 hours, if you can call whatever just happened sleep. The sun's not even up, but the chores are. You tie her to your chest with a strip of cloth that smells like cabbage and milk, shove a crust of bread in your mouth, and head outside to gather kindling before the cook fire dies again. Your breasts ache, leaking. You try not to flinch when the goat nudges you too hard, because now your body isn't yours anymore. It belongs to the baby, the household, the village, the next heir, whatever man comes knocking, husband, landlord, or midwife. You're a machine that makes milk, stitches cloth, carries hay, and produces tiny humans. You've become in essence a wet nurse. In noble houses, wet nursing is practically an industry. Rich women hand their infants off within days of birth so they can get back to their real duties, managing estates, attending court, or producing the next heir. Meanwhile, the actual feeding falls to women like you, lower-class mothers who recently gave birth and can be hired or coerced into breastfeeding someone else's child. Sometimes it's formal. You're paid, clothed, even housed on the estate. Other times it's less clear, more like, you feed this baby or I find someone who will. You remember when your cousin was sent to the manor after her second son died. Still full of milk, she was given a noble infant to nurse. She cried when he latched, because he wasn't hers, because her grief didn't know the difference, because her grief didn't stop her breasts from doing what they were built to do. Some say wet nurses are respected. Others say they're used and forgotten. Historians still argue whether the practice empowered lower-class women or just exploited them in softer packaging. What's clear is this. Once you're a wet nurse, your value shifts. You're no longer just a woman. You're a utility. And it doesn't stop with milk. Your fertility is everyone's business. Whether you want another child is irrelevant. Spacing births, giving yourself time to recover, is a luxury, and not one the church appreciates. Deliberately avoiding pregnancy, sin. Even if you're too weak, too tired, or just had a baby 5 minutes ago. One fringe belief: some midwives carry amulets made from dried corn, the membrane that sometimes covers a newborn's head at birth. They say wearing it protects from death in childbirth. You don't know if it's true, but you've seen women clutching them like rosaries while screaming through labor. And scream they do. Childbirth here isn't sterile or sacred. It's bloody, loud, terrifying. You're surrounded by other women, midwives, neighbors, sometimes your mother. Men are nowhere to be found. It's not their place. Unless you die, then suddenly a priest appears to whisper last rites into your ear before your soul flies off, hopefully not still screaming. Back to the baby. She's fussing again. You adjust the cloth sling, shift her weight, and try to remember when you last ate something solid. Was it yesterday? Or the day before? A knock on the door. It's a young girl, maybe 13, pale, thin. She's crying. She says her belly hurts, that she hasn't bled in 2 moons, that someone told her you might know things. You close the door behind her. Because now, you're not just a mother, or a wet nurse, or a wife. You've become the village's unofficial midwife, even though no one said it aloud. You take her hand, give her water, and ask her questions, gently. You already know the answers. You've seen it before. What happens next depends on the season, the weather, the risk. You could brew her something, a tea of rue and wild carrot, bitter as heartbreak. But it's dangerous. She could get sick, or worse. Or it might not work at all. And if the church finds out, you're both damned. There are no clean choices here, just muddy ones, desperate ones. But you'll help, of course you will. Because who else will? You're reminded of what the priest once said in his sermon: a woman's virtue is her silence. You wanted to stand up and scream. Instead, you looked down at your daughter suckling at your breast and whispered, not hers. Sometimes you catch your husband watching you, not with lust, but with something else. Awe, worry, guilt. He sees what motherhood is doing to you, how it stretches you thin, turns your hands to leather, your spine into rope. But what can he say? He has his role, you have yours. Later that night, as you collapse into bed, your daughter finally asleep on your chest, you wonder what your body would be like if it belonged to no one but you. If it could just be yours. Not a vessel, not a provider, not a womb for hire. Just skin and blood and breath. You know it's not a dream you can afford, but it's one you let yourself have for a few minutes before the crying starts again. You're kneeling again, cold stone under your knees, splinters pressing through the weave of your wool dress. The confessional is quiet, too quiet, and you can hear every one of your own breaths. On the other side of the screen, Father Gregory shifts in his seat. His cassock rustles. You recognize the sound. It's always the same: fabric, breath, judgment. Speak, he says. You hesitate. Because how do you confess something you're not even sure is a sin? It's her dream, you whisper, about my husband, but different. You don't say the rest. That in the dream you were the one leading, that he listened, that it was warm, not rushed, that you touched him in a way you never would in daylight, that for once you wanted it. Silence. But then, desire outside of procreative purpose must be confessed. His voice is dull, rehearsed. He's said this line 100 times to 100 other kneeling women. Even within marriage, lust can lead the soul astray. You stare at the screen. For a second, you imagine him behind it. Grey hair, dry mouth, eyes that never quite meet yours when you pass on the road. You think about how he's never been married, never raised children, never bled or nursed or stitched shut a torn hem with one hand while balancing a squirming baby in the other. And yet, He's the one who decides what's pure and what's not. This is the absurdity of the medieval confessional. A place where you're expected to pour out your most intimate thoughts to someone who cannot and will never experience the life you live. And the more honest you are, the more dangerous it gets. Historians still argue whether the confessional was originally intended for spiritual guidance or social control. Every time you kneel here, you walk a razor's edge. Say too much, you're impure. Say too little, you're hiding something. Either way, you leave with a prayer list longer than your to-do list, and just as little relief. One fringe manuscript, hidden in a monastery cellar and unearthed centuries later, includes sample questions for confessors. Among them, did you lie with your husband face to face? Did you experience pleasure? Did you cause your husband to spill seed in vain? There's no good answer to any of those. Honesty just gets you penance, and penance is often absurd. Last time you admitted to impure dreams, he told you to fast for 3 days and avoid all meat, except fish, of course. Fish is God's food. Flesh, ironically, is not. You do the penance. You always do. But lately you've started muttering your own prayers instead. Because sometimes, in the quiet, you remember an older woman who used to live at the edge of the village. People called her mad, said she spoke to the trees. She said prayers in a strange language, half Latin, half something else. You once asked her what they meant. True words, she told you. Not the kind they taught us to say, but the kind we mean. You didn't understand then. You do now. Because what if prayer isn't about guilt? What if it's about survival? You whisper your own version of a Hail Mary under your breath that night. Blessed be the mother who bled, who wept, who bore. Blessed be the woman who loved a man who didn't know how. Blessed be the silence and the scream that comes after. Your husband doesn't hear. He's already asleep, one hand on his belly, the other twitching with the memory of the plough. You turn away. The next day you pass Father Gregory in the market. He gives you a tight nod. You curtsy, polite. But inside you think of every thought you didn't confess, every ache you swallowed, every desire you buried because it wasn't pure. You hear rumors that some women don't confess at all, that they've built their own kind of faith, a secret one, tied to the moon and the harvest, and the way the wind moves through barley. Not heresy, just honesty. One even says she prays to Saint Wilgefortis, the bearded virgin saint who refused to marry and grew facial hair as divine protection. You chuckle when you hear that, not because it's silly, but because it makes more sense than half the sermons you've ever heard. In the end, maybe salvation isn't about kneeling or confessing or performing guilt. Maybe it's about living through it, day after day, with the baby on your hip and the pot boiling over, and your back screaming, and your mind whispering, just one more breath, just one more step. More penance enough. You finish your chores, you rock the baby to sleep, you blow out the candle, and lie next to a man who doesn't ask what you dreamed. And for the first time in weeks, you let yourself dream again. You catch your reflection in a rain puddle, murky and shaking with every ripple. Your face looks older than you feel, creased at the eyes, red around the nose, mouth set in a line that hasn't smiled much lately. A man passing by mutters something under his breath. You don't catch all of it, just the word temptress. You look down, your neckline is barely open, your hair is tied, your hands are full of turnips. Temptress? In the medieval world, a woman doesn't need to show skin to be feared. She just needs to exist. Your body is both desired and despised, beautiful and blamed. You've heard it since you were old enough to fetch water. Eve brought the fall. Delilah destroyed Samson. Women are weak, wicked, the source of temptation. And when things go wrong, whether it's a bad harvest, a miscarriage, or your husband's wandering eye, you are the first suspect. You've seen it. When a child is stillborn, it's whispered that the mother must have sinned. When a storm ruins the crops, someone recalls a woman who walked too freely by the river. When a man falls ill in his bed, they say it's the fault of the bitter wife he married last spring. Historians still argue whether this misogyny was universally believed or simply repeated until it soaked through the walls like smoke from the hearth. Either way, it's everywhere. In sermons, in folk tales, in laws written by men who've never washed a baby or buried a sister. One especially grim law from a 13th century English township. If a woman was accused of sorcery through seduction, she could be dunked in cold water to test her innocence. Float, guilty. Sink, innocent. But dead. It's a lose-lose for women who know how to speak up, or read, or heal, or even just look someone in the eye for too long. Even fertility, the one thing everyone demands of you, is twisted into suspicion. Can't get pregnant? Your womb is cursed. Get pregnant too easily? Must be a trickster. Bear daughters instead of sons? Clearly a punishment. Some women carry charms sewn into their underclothes to avoid these judgments. Small iron nails, dried herbs, scraps of parchment inscribed with sacred names. Protection, they say, from the evil eye. In truth, it's protection from a world that already sees them as guilty. Your neighbor Helda once confessed that she wears a belt of rowan berries under her skirt. She says it keeps people from staring too hard. You wonder if that's a blessing or a curse. And then there's the obsession with women's bodies being dirty. You're told not to enter the church while menstruating, that your blood is unclean, that even touching holy water during your time can bring bad luck. Some priests forbid communion to any woman in her monthly course. Others won't even look her in the eye. One particularly strange fringe tradition, burying a woman's menstrual cloth under the church porch to purge her impurity into the earth. Whether anyone actually did this is debated, but someone believed it enough to write it down. Meanwhile, your body keeps bleeding every month like it always has. Like your mother's did, like her mother's did. No amount of prayer or scolding ever stopped it. You once asked the midwife why it's considered so shameful. She just laughed. Because it scares them. What bleeds but doesn't die? It sticks with you. Later that day, you walk past a group of boys throwing stones at a half-mad old woman mumbling to herself. They call her a witch. No one stops them. She probably delivered half of them when they were born. This is the shape of things. A woman with knowledge is dangerous. A woman with a voice is worse. And a woman with both? Burn the witch. You remember when you learned to count? Your uncle taught you with stones and beans. You could do sums by age 8. Someone said it was impressive. Someone else said it was unladylike. By age 10 you'd stopped. Now you measure by instinct. How much barley fills a pot? How many days until your next bleed? How long you can go before your back gives out? But part of you still wants to learn. At night you scratch letters into the dirt floor with a stick. Just 1 or 2 at a time. The ones your uncle taught you. A, B, D, G. They look strange in the torchlight, but familiar. The baby wakes and cries. You set the stick down, pull her close, rock gently. She doesn't know yet what the world thinks of women, of their bodies, of their minds, of their mistakes. You hold her tighter. You hope she'll be brave enough to break the rules, or clever enough to survive inside them. 'Cause for now, that's all you can give her. That and your lullabies, the ones your mother sang, the ones that say, "You are more than what they fear. You are what they'll never understand." The moon is high and the hearth glows low. You wait until the baby is sound asleep, wrapped tight in wool and dreams. Then you step outside. The air is sharp but quiet. No one watches you as you walk beyond the village boundary, just a little way, into the grove of hawthorns, where the real wisdom lives. She's waiting, of course, the herbalist, the old woman with ink on her fingers and dirt under her nails. Some call her a witch, others call her auntie. You call her what she is, the only woman who understands what it means to want control over your own body. You kneel across from her as she stirs something thick and green in a cracked clay pot. The smell is bitter, sharp with rue and iron. She glances up and asks the question straight. Later you. He swallowed. 2 moons. She nods, adds a pinch of something dark and fibrous. Pennyroyal. You know the name. You've heard the whispers. Because in medieval Europe there are no pharmacies, no pamphlets, no warnings. But there are plants, and secrets, and generations of women who have passed knowledge from mouth to ear in kitchens, forests and shadows. Want to avoid pregnancy? There's wild carrot, chewed after sex to scatter the seed. Or Queen Anne's lace, steeped into tea. Or a bundle of mugwort tied at the ankle during your bleeding days. Already pregnant? The options turn risky. You've heard of tansy, parsley, feverfew and wormwood. But the doses are never exact, and the line between help and harm is hair-thin. Historians still argue whether these remedies were widely used or rare acts of rebellion. But enough records survive, trial notes, physician rants, ecclesiastical warnings, to prove this wasn't fantasy. This was real. It is real. The church calls it murder, the law calls it crime, but women? Women call it choice. You sip the tea she offers. It burns your throat, settles in your stomach like warm stone. You don't ask what's in it. You already know. There's a strange peace in this place. A place where your body is just yours. Not your husband's, not your priest's, not the village's. Just flesh, breath and bone, being cared for without judgment. She gives you a bundle of herbs to take home. Steep them tomorrow, she says, not tonight. Let the body rest. Then she reaches for your hand and wraps your fingers around a carved piece of bone, small, round, inscribed with markings you don't understand. For protection, she says. You nod, too tired to cry. As you walk back, wind whips through the trees. You pass a small shrine built into the rocks. A statue of the Virgin Mary, chipped and leaning. You pause, look her in the eyes. She looks tired too. People think of her as holy, silent, obedient. But what's never said out loud is that she gave birth, in pain, in dirt, with no midwife in the cold. She must have been scared. Maybe she whispered prayers of her own, not from scripture, but from the dark root of fear all mothers know. Maybe she understood what it means to want something else. Back in your hut, your husband stirs, but doesn't wake. You boil the herbs again, let the steam fill the room. You don't drink it tonight, just inhale. Just think. Not because you hate the child you might carry, not because you're wicked, but because you're tired, and poor, and stretched so thin you're afraid one more life inside you might tear you open. That's not a sin, that's a fact. And you're not alone. There's the midwife who buried her own child, and now helps others prevent the same fate. There's the noblewoman who sends secret letters asking for root powders to calm the womb. There's the servant girl who used fish bladder soaked in vinegar, desperate to avoid another beating. Some use old charms, knotted cords, whispered rhymes, saint medals worn backward. Some just pray, not to be forgiven, just to be free. One fringe tale tells of a woman in Wales who buried a lamb's tongue under her bed and danced barefooted ash to end a pregnancy. Did it work? No one knows, but someone remembered it. That's enough. You lie in bed and listen to the fire crackle. The bone charm is still warm in your hand. Your stomach rolls, not from guilt, but from the strength it takes to not be sorry. Tomorrow you'll decide whether to finish the tea, whether to let your body choose its own way forward. Tonight, you breathe. And for once, no one's telling you what to do with your skin, your blood, your breath. Just you, just silence. And that's more sacred than any prayer you've ever said. The labor starts at dawn, of course, because pain never waits for comfort. The first cramp wakes you like a knife to the belly, sharp and deep. You clutch your side, stagger up and call for your mother. Your voice doesn't even sound like yours anymore. She knows. She's been listening for it. Every mother listens for the moment her daughter starts to scream like that. Boil water, she snaps to your sister. Fetch Ilsa. That's the midwife. You'd hope not to need her this soon. But here you are. No one says it, but everyone knows the truth. Childbirth in the medieval world is a battlefield, and you're armed with nothing but instinct, prayers, and a few rough hands to hold you down if it gets that bad. You drop to all fours as the next wave hits, harder this time. Sweat pools under your arms even though it's winter. Your feet are freezing, your forehead is already slick. There's no doctor, no pain relief, no sterilized anything. Just midwives, cloth rags, and whatever herb someone remembered to hang over the door last week. Rue, St. John's wort, crushed marigold petals stuffed in the corners for luck. You're vaguely aware of someone lighting candles, muttering prayers to St. Margaret, protector of mothers, slayer of dragons, bringer of life through agony. You want to believe in her, but right now it just hurts, and it won't stop. Midwives in your time are half healers, half sorceresses. They know things no man is allowed to say aloud. How to reposition a baby turned the wrong way, how to push herbs into the womb with nothing but their fingers, how to whisper old names that soothe when the screaming starts. They're revered and feared in equal measure. If a child is born strong, it's thanks to their hands. If the baby dies, whispers begin. Ilsa arrives quickly, hair still half braided. She touches your belly, presses lightly, listens, then nods. First one. Might take a while. You want to curse, you want to run, but you can't move. Because now the contractions are coming like waves, crashing one after another, giving you no time to breathe, to think, to be. This is what no one ever explained. If not just the pain, it's the waiting, the not knowing. Will this end in life or death, joy or burial? The odds aren't great. You've seen it. Half the women you know have lost someone, or been someone, whose story ended right here on the floor, under blood and linen, before a cradle was ever carved. Historians still argue how common maternal death truly was. Some say it was exaggerated, a spectre used by the church to control women's behavior. Others argue it was understated, that so many deaths were chalked up to God's will and never written down. All you know is that no one breathes easy during childbirth. The baby shifts. You cry out, louder this time. Ilsa orders your husband out of the room. Good. You don't want him here. You don't want anyone here except the women who understand this hell. One brings a strip of leather for you to bite. Another wipes your face with a rag soaked in vinegar. You're panting now, shivering though your skin burns. You hear the old rhyme. They start to chant. Open wide the willow's gate. Let the child pass through her fate. You cling to it like a raft. And still, the pain doesn't stop. Your mother leans in and says the thing you've dreaded. Push. You scream. It's not graceful. It's not poetic. It's primal. Animal. Your spine arches. Your thighs burn. You hear yourself sobbing and don't care who hears. There's blood, more than you expected. Someone says they can see the head. Push again. And again. And again. And then, finally, silence. A beat. Then a cry. Tiny, wet, furious. But you don't feel relief. Not yet. Ilsa holds the baby up. A girl, she says. You collapse. You're barely aware of the afterbirth, of the ragged tears that Ilsa stitches without ceremony, of the bone-deep cold that seeps into your arms even as they hand you the child. She's tiny, pink, wrinkled like an old pear. She blinks up at you, mouth twitching like she wants to cry again, but isn't sure it's worth the effort. You stare at her, then you cry. Not because you're sad, not because you're happy, but because you're still alive. Not everyone gets to say that. Later, someone hangs St. Margaret's icon above your bed. Another boils sage to cleanse the air. Your sister sneaks in with honey water. Your husband sits awkwardly nearby, staring at you like you've become something else. Ugh. You've been to the edge and come back. Now you lie still and let the ache settle deep into your bones. You hold your daughter against your chest and whisper a name you've been keeping secret just in case. Because that's how it works here. A birth is a gamble, every breath a miracle. And tonight, just for once, the house is quiet. The bailiff's knocking before the dew dries. 3 quick raps, no courtesy. You open the door, bleary-eyed, baby on hip, bread in hand, and he's already muttering something about a summons. Someone's accused you of impropriety. You blink. Of what? Eden look you in the eye, just hands over a folded parchment sealed with wax. Come to the manor hall by sundown. Bring a witness if you can find one. You already know who it's about. You just don't know what they're claiming this time. Because in medieval life, especially for women, the law doesn't protect, it exposes. Your personal life isn't personal, it's public record. And when things go sideways, people talk. The baker's wife saw you walking alone with the shepherd last month. You were carrying butter, he was carrying turnips. But that's enough. In small towns, reputations stick harder than mud. One rumor, one side-eye, and suddenly you're the loose one. Or worse, the witch. And the church, the manor, and your neighbors all keep very detailed records of every mistake you've ever made, or been accused of making. Medieval court records are full of carnal accusations. A miller's daughter seen in a haystack with a soldier. A widow who entertained a priest during Lent. A wife who gave birth 7 months after her wedding, too soon. Each case is carefully logged, testimonies gathered. Sometimes they even inspect the bedclothes, sometimes the baby, sometimes you. Historians still debate how fair these proceedings really were. Some claim local courts offered more flexibility than royal ones, more mercy. Others argue they were spectacles of shame, disguised as justice. You arrive at the manor hall just before sunset. The room smells like damp stone and old parchment. Lord Renault is perched on his high chair, robes too clean for anyone who works real hours. Beside him, the parish clerk, quill in hand, watching everything, recording. They call your name. The charge, suspicion of fornication outside lawful marriage. A fancy way of saying someone thinks you've been sleeping around. You scan the crowd. Of course the baker's wife is here, so is her nosy cousin. You see the shepherd too, staring at his boots. He won't speak for you, not today. You're told to testify. You say the truth. I was alone. I was walking. That's all. They ask what colour your shift was that day, whether the shepherd looked flushed, whether you laughed too loudly in his presence. The questions are absurd, but the consequences aren't. If found guilty, you could be fined, whipped, or locked in the stocks. Public shame, public pain, and worst of all, your child could be labelled a bastard, even though your husband is sitting right there, jaw tight, eyes full of quiet rage. He doesn't defend you, but he doesn't accuse you either. In this world, silence is the closest thing to mercy. You're released with a warning, no formal punishment this time, just a scribble in the records, and a dozen new stares from people who'll never forget. You walk home numb, because even though the court let you go, your reputation is bruised, and bruises never heal where people can't see them. They fester, turn into stories. Stories become truths. Later that week, you overhear a conversation in the market. She must have tempted him. You know what they say about women who gather herbs at night. That old accusation again. Craft. You want to scream, or laugh, or both. Because you know what they really mean? You're a woman who doesn't flinch, who walks alone, who talks to midwives and knows how to boil roux. Enough. Former woman you once knew, Elinley was accused of placing a curse on her neighbour's crops. Her only crime, refusing a man's offer to share his blanket. She was made to sit outside the chapel with a rope around her neck and a candle in each hand. Penance, they called it. Punishment, he knew. The records are full of women like her. In York, A woman accused of seducing a priest, then punished when it turned out he'd seduced her. In Ghent, a mother of 5 fined for lewd conduct after her husband died and she dared to speak with another man within a month. In Paris, a laundress whipped in public for immodest laughter. They wrote it all down, every word, every wound. And you wonder, centuries from now, when scholars read these records, will they see the truth? That these weren't trials, they were rituals. Rituals of control, of humiliation, of fear wrapped in parchment. Back at home, your daughter is fussing. You rock her gently, whispering soft lies to calm her. No one will hurt you. You're safe. You're strong. You look at her face, tiny, stubborn, perfect. You wonder if she'll grow into the kind of woman they write down in records, or the kind who reads them and survives anyway. Either way, she'll learn what it means to be watched, to be measured, to be judged. But not tonight. Tonight, you wrap her in wool, sing a lullaby about fields and stars, and hold her close enough to forget, for a little while, that your name lives on someone's parchment now. Your hands are wrinkled now, not from the bath. They don't exist here. From scrubbing linen, rinsing blood, wringing the same rags over the same trough for 30 winters. Maybe more. You don't count the years, you count seasons, births, harvests, losses. Tonight, you're sick, not the sniffle kind, the deep, bone-hollow kind, the kind that tells you the fire might not need stoking in the morning. The priest has been sent for. They say you're dying, which is funny. You feel like you've been dying slowly for years. Now it just has a name. Maybe it's the cough that never left, or the bruises that don't fade, or maybe it's just being tired in a way that sleep can't fix. Your daughter kneels beside you, now grown, her hands calloused like yours once were. You see yourself in her eyes, fierce, sad, smarter than she lets on. You squeeze her fingers. Don't let them take your fire, you whisper. She doesn't cry. You love her for that. Then you hear the door creak open. Leather shoes, soft coughs, the smell of incense clinging to wool. Father Gregory has arrived. You wonder what he sees when he looks at you. A wife, a sinner, a mother, a mouth too quiet or too loud, depending on the season. His voice is low, almost kind. He asks the questions he's asked 100 times. Do you confess your sins before God and man? You do. Because it's what's expected. And maybe part of you still believes there's some safety in the ritual. Confession at the edge of death is supposed to wipe the slate. Doesn't matter if the slate was ever yours to write on. But here's the problem. The sins he wants to hear aren't the ones you remember. He asks, did you ever lie with a man not your husband? You want to say, yes, and I loved him. He made me laugh in a hayloft when no one else ever tried. He asks, did you ever use herbs to prevent conception? You think, yes, because I didn't want to die bringing a 6th into a world that forgets women after 3. He asks, did you ever lust in your heart? Do you close your eyes? Because the truth is, lust was the only thing that ever felt like yours, the only thing that wasn't taxed, judged, shared, or sold. It burned bright once, briefly, like a candle in a storm, but it kept you warm through so much cold. Instead, you say what he wants. I did. I do. I am sorry. Even if you're not. He gives you absolution in Latin, pressing oil onto your forehead. It's supposed to be holy, but it feels like resignation. Then he leans closer. See your husband again, he says gently. You try not to laugh. That's not who you want waiting on the other side. You want the midwife who taught you to count contractions with river stones. The girl who sang to you while you pushed. The firewood boy who once carved hearts behind the church. The baby you never held, lost between moon cycles. The man who never asked for anything but your real name. Those are the souls you hope to see. He asks if you want the final rites. You nod. Let him do the ritual. Salt, water, words. You're already fading anyway. Outside you hear the wind rise through the trees. You smell ash and cold. Your daughter wipes your brow and sings your old lullaby, the one about barley fields and birds that don't nest. Your body is heavy, sinking. And then, one last breath. Not violent, not loud. Leaving. Like a door quietly closing. The record of your death will be simple. Wife of Thomas, known for piety and service, confessed, buried with prayer. It wouldn't say you were clever, or brave, or that you saved 3 women from dying in childbirth with nothing but thread and vinegar. It won't say that once you made a man tremble just by looking back at him, or that you sometimes danced alone when the harvest moon rose. But your daughter will remember, and one day she'll tell someone, and maybe that story will survive longer than your name scratched into some old church ledger. Years later, they dig up the old abbey garden. The stone walls have long since crumbled into moss and silence, overtaken by ivy and rain. The site is peaceful now, just bird song and wind, but the dirt still holds stories. A team of archaeologists combs through the rubble, careful brushes revealing fragments of pottery, bones, rusted hinges. One of them finds a wax tablet, half mashed, still bearing a faint inscription. The Latin's crude, maybe written by someone who only half understood it. Beads. My heart is not his, it is mine. They stop, read it again. No name, no date. Just defiance scratched into wax. Not far from the tablet is a bundle of bones, small, female, likely peasant. The pelvis shows signs of multiple births. The teeth are worn, the spine curved from years of labor. There's a rosary tangled around the ribs. They write down the find, assign it a number. Individual 22B. They don't know she once prayed under her breath while nursing a baby, or that she buried a love so deep no record ever caught it. They don't know she carried shame that wasn't hers, or that her laughter echoed once through barley fields. But they find something else, scratched onto the wall of the monk's dormitory nearby. Drawing. 2 figures beneath a crescent moon, holding hands. One wears a long dress, the other has no face. Around them a scrawl of words. We met where no one watched. No one knows who drew it. Maybe it was a joke, maybe a confession, maybe both. But it survived. Because the body dies, but the story doesn't. And in these remnants, bone, wax, scribble, silence, a truth flickers. That sex in the medieval world wasn't about purity or shame or saints or sinners. Not really. It was about control, survival, secrecy, power, sometimes tenderness, often fear, but always human. You imagine her now, that woman whose name was lost, whose spine bent under babies and firewood and expectation. Maybe she stood in this very spot, barefoot in mud, breath clouding the morning air. Maybe she once whispered, "I want something else." Maybe she got it. And now, it's your turn to exhale. The candle's nearly out. The house is quiet, your own breath softens, your mind floats, gentle and unburdened. You leave the straw floor behind, the noise, the judgment, the aching back and blistered hands. You drift beyond stone walls and church bells, past whispered rules and rotted records. You follow the memory of a woman laughing in the dark, of a secret pressed under the skin like a charm. You feel her beside you now, older, freer, quieter, and in that silence you find peace. You are not in that world anymore. You are safe. You are whole. You are free to rest. Sleep now, where no one watches. The story ends here. Close your eyes, drift deep, sweet dreams.